BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello everybody, today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? I hope everyone had a good weekend. In this episode, I will be responding to the episode The Zodiac Killer Files Volume 4, looking at some developments with AI in relation to the Zodiac Killer mystery and a new possible solution to the Zodiac Killer's Z13 Cipher. The Zodiac Killer was a serial killer that operated in California in 1968 and 69. Whatever happened before or after that is still part of the mystery. And I do have a final announcement to drop, and that is that there will be a live stream on June 16th of 2024, just in case you're listening to this in the future, and it will be aired on the channel The French Wrecking Crew, run by Jerome, where he will be talking all about his own personal Zodiac theory. So if you want to hear just different perspectives on this case, I invite you to check out The French Wrecking Crew. I'm definitely going to watch Jerome's live stream because he has been a longtime follower of this program, and Jerome has also followed the Zodiac Killer mystery for more than 20 years, so I know some of the elements that are going to be in his theory, but I want to hear the entire presentation and look how he is going to piece everything together. One more time, that will be on the channel The French Wrecking Crew, June 16th, 2024. I invite you to listen. But I would like to begin today's episode with the AI discussions. I was over on Drew Beeson's channel, and I was watching one of his Sunday episodes, and he talks about the Zodiac Killer very frequently. Sometimes on his Sunday shows, he also discusses other topics, such as the Yuba County Five, and of course, Drew has done a lot with D.B. Cooper as well. He has a book out about D.B. Cooper called Paratrooper of Fortune, and his D.B. Cooper suspect, Ted B. Braden. But AI is becoming more widely discussed in true crime circles, and there are different ways that people can use AI. For example, you can use things like artificial intelligence to examine documents, examine linguistic styles, but the things that I have noticed popping up more and more frequently is when AI brings the Zodiac Killer's composite sketches to life. Now, some people think that this might not be the most valuable mental exercise, but when we look at how AI is viewing the Zodiac Killer and depicting the Zodiac Killer, there are some striking differences compared to some of the major suspects out there and even the alternative suspects. And I would like to give a shout out to Jerome as well for sharing these documents. Jerome shared them, but they are from Soul Sacrifice, looking at the Zodiac Killer's composite sketch brought to life. And if I understand the process, it's that first AI created a lifelike composite of the Zodiac Killer, and then there was an additional step taken where the composite sketch was blended with the AI sketch to try and match things up even more closely. There's also another AI design of the Zodiac Killer that's been going around for some time now, and there are even the victims are being brought to life, which I will talk about in just a second. But in terms of the depictions of the killer, it really appears that all of these AI creations are showing somebody who is well over 40 years old, in my opinion. I mean, we're talking perhaps around age 45, more so than anything else. That is in a purely unprofessional, superficial analysis on my part. It's just something that I noticed when I saw the first colorized composite that was shared in a Facebook group called the Zodiac Killer Library. It really looked like the Zodiac Killer when the more lifelike features are added. It depicts somebody who is much older than a lot of the suspects that are being discussed. We're talking about people who are in their 30s, people who are in their 20s. Some Zodiac Killer suspects were even teenagers in 1968 and 69. But I do have a follow-up from Drew Beeson's live stream because he was talking about how and why the Zodiac Killer chose to commit his crimes. Robert Graysmith wrote about this in his Zodiac book, Zodiac and Zodiac Unmasked, that it appeared that the Zodiac murders took place on nights, evenings, weekends, and holidays. Now, some people believe that the Zodiac Killer's first murder took place on October 30th of 1966 with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates. She is the most widely discussed Zodiac Killer pre-canonical victim. And that would have been the day before Halloween, so if she was a Zodiac victim, that's another holiday connection. But December 20th of 1968 was not only a night and weekend, but it was very close to Christmas. And we would think about things like Christmas Vacation. Then you have July 4th of 1969 when Darlene Ferrin is murdered. And no matter what, some people say the shooting occurred on July 5th at 12:01 a.m. It was the night of July 4th when people are having the 4th of July celebrations. Lake Berryessa with the murders of Brian Hartnell, with the murders of Cecilia Shepard and the stabbing of Brian Hartnell. Brian Hartnell was the survivor at Lake Berryessa. And then the Stein murder took place on October 11th, so that's near Columbus Day. Nights, evenings, weekends, and holidays. And this has led some people to believe that the killer was a father, family man, someone who was married, and he's using these occasions as a way to get away from the family. But the thing that Drew did was he looked at an angle that I've never explored before on this channel, and that is proximity to the space program, that these dates do also show some similarities to NASA and the moon landing. I mean, we have the 1969 moon landing, the Apollo launches, and I'm just putting it out there that this is one that I'm going to have to investigate in the future to see if there actually is some type of significance. And if you do watch Drew Beeson's live stream on this, he brought up some other pieces of supporting evidence, such as that the Zodiac killer used Apollo stamps on his mailings. But this is just one where I'm going to have to learn more about before I can truly comment on. But I did talk to you guys about the Zodiac killer's composite sketches. And then I've also wanted to share some of these things for a while, and that is there are AI recreations of the Zodiac killer victims to show what they would look like if they were actually alive, bringing their photographs to life. And I think that it's a very valuable tribute and discussion, and that's what you're looking at going by on the screen right now. And if I can be very honest with you, my favorite one is the one of Darlene Ferrin, because that one, I think, is truly, when you see the photograph coming to life, that's one of the most famous photos of Darlene Ferrin. And it does look like the picture is just turning into a human person. So I think that that is very, very impressive. And I mean, this is all done by the channel That Cruel World. So I thank them for that. This Cruel World. And I thank them for this creation. Now, as far as looking at the pre-Zodiac crimes, as I said, there is a new episode on Planet X Filmworks, the Zodiac Killer Files, episode 4, and it really is exploring the pre-Zodiac murders. That series begins with the pre-Zodiac crimes that took place in Southern California. It is hosted by Ross Geraci of Planet X Filmworks, and Ross lives in San Diego, and he has the opportunity to visit these locations, and it is very, very impressive the way he puts everything together, as well as getting to see the scenery, the landscapes, the terrain. All of that stuff is shared in a first-hand way. And episode 4 is now out, and this is the one that I think everybody was waiting for, because it's talking about the Domingos Edwards murders from 1963, as well as the murder of Vern Smith from that year. On June 4th of 1963, Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards were gunned down at Gaviota Beach, and it could have been the first crime of the Zodiac killer, where you have a killer approaching two people by a body of water. It was a senior ditch day, so they were not supposed to be in school, and also not a lot of people would have expected them to go there. They went by themselves in a secluded area off of Highway Route 101. The killer brought a gun, a knife, pre-cut lengths of rope. He was carrying a .22 caliber firearm, using long rifle ammunition, and it appears that the killer instructed Linda Edwards to tie up Robert Domingos. Once she did that, Robert Domingos was able to break free from the restraints, because most likely, the killer did not check the restraints to make sure they were tight enough, and he got into a fist fight with the perpetrator. And then they made a run for it, and they were more or less gunned down. Then their bodies were dragged to a seaside shack, and the killer appeared to have tried to set the seaside shack on fire. But we almost certainly know that the killer was carrying a knife, because it appeared that Linda Edwards' swimsuit was cut by knife, and that her upper body was exposed and revealed. So as far as the Zodiac killer connections, some people believe that this was the first crime, and the primary reason why the Zodiac killer chose to attack Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa was because the Zodiac thought that he failed. He murdered both of the victims. And how would this be a failure? One of you guys in the comment section said it the best. He lost control of the situation. Both victims were murdered, but he lost his power over Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards. And even if both of the victims were murdered, some guy getting punched in the face by Robert Domingos and knocked down, perhaps for a period of time, that's going to feel like a failure. And Michael Cole has written a lot about this in his Zodiac Killer trilogy when he talks about how this person probably planned out the Domingos Edwards murders intensely in their mind. And then, as soon as they got there, they realized no matter how much mental planning you put into something, it doesn't necessarily work out that way. So the person dragged them to the seaside shack perhaps because he was covering up his failure to maintain power in the situation, and he just barely got out of there. He just barely was able to get away with it. But there is a suspect in the Domingos Edwards murders who is a Zodiac Killer suspect as well. The problem is that we don't truly know his name, and it's just Sandy. And these were my biggest takeaways from Ross's episode 4 on the Domingos Edwards murders, the Gaviota Beach murders. And it's looking at the possibility of Sandy being the murderer of Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards, and Sandy being the Zodiac Killer, as well as committing another crime on June 3rd of 1963, the murder of Vern C. Smith. And Sandy was part of a group of 3 people, J.C. Reed, James Coleman, and Sandy is the third one. We do not know his real name. And near the end of the video, Ross openly says that Sandy is not a very likely suspect for the Domingos Edwards murders, but also that Sandy perhaps isn't even the best suspect for the murder of Vern C. Smith. And if you do watch Ross's video, I think that he did one of the best walkthroughs and breakdowns of the Vern Smith murder on June 3rd of 1963. Sandy is with these 2 guys, James Coleman and J.C. Reed. They go to a restaurant where one of their mothers worked, and she is the one who actually provided them with the information that Vern Smith was known to carry large amounts of money, or he frequently had money on him. And then they tell him that they need gas, that they're out of gas. So he drives to get the gas, and then he's filling a gas can for them. And the story is that Sandy just pulls out a knife and stabs him in a purely unprovoked manner. And one of the widely held beliefs about this story is just that Sandy did it, and that's been something that's been accepted. J.C. Reed and James Coleman, getting back on track, they were interrogated separately by police officers, and to their satisfaction, it appeared that Sandy did indeed commit this crime. And when I first heard this story, my first instinct was, no, Sandy did not. He didn't do it, because he's gone. My absolute first instinct was that Sandy never existed, but it appears that Sandy was a real person. There are just too many eyewitnesses and people who saw him with J.C. Reed and James Coleman, but their explanation for him parting ways with them was he stabbed Vern Smith, and they were like, whoa, we were just supposed to rob the guy. We weren't supposed to kill him, and they're just thinking that he's freaking out. They said they found $60 on him, and they split it 3 ways. It was actually $360. They said they just gave him $20, and he went to a motel, and they ditched him, more or less. Now, this is another thing that Ross was talking about in that episode, and that is that, did that really happen? Is that really the course of events? Are J.C. Reed and James Coleman telling the truth in that story? Because it is extremely convenient for them that the murderer just walked off. It is extremely convenient for them that the murderer, who did this in an unplanned, unprovoked way where they had no part in the planning process, just happened to disappear and vanish from the face of the earth. And, I mean, what I told Ross after this was, that is a very bold theory to state that Sandy was not the murderer of Vern Smith on June 3rd of 1963. However, it coincides with a lot of my first instincts, a lot of my first suspicions about the case. I mean, the fact that the authorities are able to track down J.C. Reed and James Coleman, yet they can't get Sandy. They can't find him. And it's possible that Sandy was just a drifter, but one of the theories is that Sandy committed the murder of Vern Smith, stabbed him, and he actually is a homicidal maniac who's in the area. He made his way to a seaside shack. He either used the $20 to purchase the .22 caliber firearm, or he could have found it in the seaside shack. Someone could have stashed it there with the boxes of ammunition, and Robert Domingos and Linda Edwards were just in the wrong place at the wrong time. Sandy just held him up at gunpoint because of his homicidal tendencies. And then, once Robert Domingos was able to fight back, then Sandy is like, okay, wow, I have to slow down for a second. And then, roughly 4.5 years later, goes on to become the Zodiac Killer because now he can think about the crimes in a different way. That's how people think Sandy went on to be the Zodiac. But when it comes to the story about Sandy murdering Vern Smith, what if he didn't do it? What if he was murdered by J.C. Reed and James Coleman, and they just ditched Sandy as the fall guy? They just blamed everything on him. What if they had already parted ways with Sandy? I mean, those are definitely questions that are worth considering, because I guess I've had a lot of doubts about the story from the get-go. And it's all of this of it. It seemed too convenient that the real killer just happened to walk off, and these people had no part in planning the murder of Vern Smith. Yet they're the ones who are stuck to sit around and take the blame. Here's another thing that I didn't completely understand about Sandy murdering Vern Smith. That J.C. Reed and James Coleman found $360 on his person, and they lied to Sandy and said they only found $60. Well, how closely was Sandy paying attention? I mean, if Sandy is hovering over the body and stabbed Vern Smith, did he just walk away for a while they were searching his pockets? I mean, I don't completely understand all of those steps as they would have taken place. And, that's the only thing that I could think of, that he committed the stabbing, and then he just walked away, maybe sat down for a while, or maybe he was just pacing about or something while they search his pockets. I don't know. It's possible that Sandy was real. Sandy was definitely a real person. It's possible that Sandy was the real killer of Vern Smith, and that J.C. Reed and James Coleman were indeed telling the truth. They lied to him about the money. They wanted to get away from him because they thought that he was experiencing a new level of dangerous. I mean, if he's going to stab Vern Smith with a knife, laugh while he's doing it. And they ask him, why did you do that? We were just supposed to rob him. And he's just like, I don't know. That's their story. Maybe they did want to get away from him. Maybe they didn't. Which explanation do you think is stronger for the murder of Vern Smith? Do you think that Sandy committed that murder, or are J.C. Reed and James Coleman total liars who are just making up this story because they didn't want to face a more serious penalty? Was Sandy even present for the murder of Vern Smith? And I think you guys can understand my take on the subject. At first, my first instinct was, I thought they were total liars. Then, over time, I accepted that Sandy was indeed the murderer of Vern Smith. Now, he's a very weak Zodiac Killer suspect, if you ask me, but Ross has kind of reinvigorated those doubts and suspicions that I had about this particular story. And if you'd like to hear a very detailed breakdown of this murder, I invite you to go over to Planet X Filmworks and watch the Zodiac Killer Files, Episode 4, Volume 4, all about the Domingos Edwards murders and the murder of Vern C. Smith. Now, I told you guys that I had something about the Z13 Cipher, but I also wanted to give a shout out to Vincent McConnell. I've been talking about him on some of the recent Zodiac Killer news reports, and Vincent shares all of his Zodiac Killer observations on his personal Facebook page. But there is something that is not about the Z13 Cipher, but about the Zodiac Killer's Z340 Cipher, the second one that was created by the Zodiac. And it was solved just about 4 years ago, maybe 3.5 years ago, the one that was solved by David Ornchak and company. And again, this ties back to Drew Beeson, who's the host of the Zodcast, the guy I was talking about at the beginning, and Drew has also been a guest on this program in the past. I've been a guest on his channel, and we have looked at the possibilities as to how the Zodiac Killer created the ciphers, because the handwriting on the Zodiac Killer's ciphers is very different than the handwriting that is in the letters. And some people, like Thomas Henry Horan, author of The Myth of the Zodiac Killer, just say, well, that's because there were two different letter writers. I mean, one person wrote the letters and one person wrote the ciphers. Well, what Drew Beeson has proposed is that the ciphers were written on a light table using graph paper. And his biggest critic has been Tom Boyd of ZodiacKiller.com, who just simply says that there is no evidence for this, or that it's an unconfirmed allegation, it's maybe a suspicion, but not a certifiable fact. So what Vincent McConnell did was, he actually has this caption here. It says, "Yeah, sorry, Tom Boyd, if that's not a light table, I'll eat my shirt." And he puts the Zodiac Killer's 340 cipher on graph paper. And it shows how the first characters would fit very neatly into the graph boxes. When the first characters of the 340 cipher are H, E, and R, and then some of them have to be drawn in a different way, where it appears that the Zodiac, if he were indeed using graph paper on a light table, it would be characters that would not fit into the box, like the W or the backwards K even. Sometimes the Zodiac Killer symbol would not fit, but it starts out almost tightly focused and fitting in, and then it gets a little bit sloppier. And Vincent has shared a couple different experiments using the graph paper on the light table to show how this could have been done, and it all seems to work out. Now, Drew Beeson has a suspect out there named Donald Lee Cheney. Most of you know that. And Tom Boyd, of course, disputes that. And I think that's the heart and soul of the disagreement. However, no matter whom the Zodiac Killer is, this could be an explanation as to how and why the Zodiac created those very neat ciphers. Robert Graysmith even talked about them in his book Zodiac, calling them a work of art because they were so precisely done. Graph paper and a light table, maybe. And this is the statement that's written out by Vincent McConnell. The Z340 was a multi-transpositional homophonic substitution cipher mailed to the San Francisco Chronicle newspaper on November 9th of 1969. It was decrypted in 2020 by David Hornchak, Earl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake. It is an authenticated communication from the terrorist known as the Zodiac Killer. The graph has been added by me in an attempt to assess the likelihood of the implementation of a light table used during its composition. It is part of an investigation I am conducting into the manufacturing and composition of the confirmed letters and ciphers. This investigation is not to be confused with an investigation into the identity of the killer or other elements of the situation. It is simply an effort to determine how the Zodiac crafted his ciphers, whether or not his handwriting was synthetic. The implications for synthetic handwriting are drastic and would render the vast majority of handwriting comparisons and comparison-based investigations completely futile. And this is almost in line with what I just said in the preceding material about how no matter whom your Zodiac Killer suspect is, this could be how the Zodiac was able to create these very neat ciphers, something like graph paper and a light table. Now, the thing that, of course, Vincent and Drew Beeson are going to be asking next is, well, who would have access to graph paper and a light table? Who would be keeping these things around regularly? Who would be using them regularly? And, let's just leave it there because, as Vincent said, he doesn't want to get hunkered down on the suspects, but also, this is going to call into question a lot of analyses from handwriting experts, because what if the Zodiac Killer's handwriting is synthetic? What if he were disguising his handwriting in different ways, even using something that would obstruct the handwriting? And this could throw handwriting experts off very, very easily. But I do thank you to Vincent for sharing these things about the Zodiac Killer's C340 cipher. And I told you that I had something new from Chad Burke, or I found something new from Chad Burke, which he posted on Facebook. And that relates to the Z13 cipher. I've interviewed Chad on this channel as well. He is the author of publications such as Cracked, He Who Lives by the Code Dies by the Code, and There Never Was a Zodiac Key. Chad has spent about 6 years working on the Z13 cipher, and before you think that sounds like a lot, David Ornchak, Earl Van Eyck, and Sam Blake spent 14 years on the Z340. Specifically, David spent 14 years trying to solve the Zodiac Z340, and they were successful, so more power to Chad. And when I interviewed him in, the winter of 2023, he said he had spent 5 years now, almost 6 years, working on the Z13. And this is a more difficult cipher to solve because there are fewer possibilities and fewer options and fewer ways to connect everything together. But one thing that Chad has done is that he looks at an enormous amount of possibilities. Yet one possibility that he really has zoned in on since the publication of his ebook, He Who Lives by the Code Dies by the Code, is that The Zodiac Killer Z13 Cipher has a very bizarre symbol in it. Some of them are English language letters, then there's the Zodiac symbol, there are these 8s that are circled, and then there is what appears to be some type of modified W. Some people call this the Aries sign. Some people call this just like 2 letter L's put together almost in a backwards way, but it is not a letter from the English language. And the point that Chad Burke zones in on, and he hasn't really backed down from, is he believes that it is the Arabic letter Del, making one of the D sounds in Arabic. They have 2 letter Ds actually, Del and Dad, and this is one of them. But what Chad did was a very simple attempt at solving the cipher, and I think it's one of the simpler ones that he has created, and that is just that this is referred to as the My Name Is cipher. And you can see very clearly from the Z13 that there are the letters N-A and M, and there's also a letter E. And some people believe that this is the word name. One of them was Harvey Hines, who brought Lawrence Kane forward as a Zodiac killer suspect, and he thought the solution was name Kane 1924, 3H24, meaning that the killer was born in 1924. But if you just have name, the D sound, Del, and then you have the circled 8. 8 is the 8th. 8 is the, what's the 8th letter of the alphabet? H. And Melissa Rose Tappa of ZodiacKillerBomb.com, she's the webmaster for that website, has even said that she thought that it's not even a circled 8, it's a circled letter H. 8 and H, they go together somewhat closely, almost hand in hand. H is the 8th letter of the alphabet. Okay, hope I've covered that. So then you would have the D and the H. And then you have the Zodiac sign. And that is the true signature of it all. And Chad's proposal was, it's just, my name is D.H. Zodiac. And I was immediately wondering, well, why couldn't it be H.D.? But if this is his proposal, that these are the killer's initials, and then the symbol represents the letter D from Arabic, the 8 ball represents the letter H, and you would have to eliminate certain characters, but just my name is D.H. Zodiac. The Zodiac symbol would stay there. I think that this would be a very simple solution. I think that it's hiding in plain sight. I think that's one thing that the Zodiac Killer could do very easily. And I said on a previous Zodiac Killer news report that I was particularly impressed by Chad Burke's ability to look at some creative ways of trying to solve the Z13. The one that I liked the most was using the deck of playing cards and a suit of cards. Like, there are 13 symbols in the suit of cards. First you have the ace, that's 1. Then you have 2 through 10, right? The deuce to the 10. And then you would have jack, queen, king. And using those certain symbols to make letter combinations. If I needed to create a 13-character cipher for some reason, I would probably borrow that method. I think that that is extremely creative. I think it's extremely impressive. It's fascinating and enthralling. But as far as what the Zodiac put into the cipher, I think he would do something like this. My name is D.H. Zodiac, maybe revealing initials, or maybe he is cluing in on some type of other aspect to the meaning, and that, DH could even have a specific meaning to him, but it's just eliminating certain symbols and rearranging the letters, and you get this very, very basic answer. What do you think about Chad Burke's solution to the Z13 cipher? What do you think about the Zodiac using symbols from other languages in the Z13, like the Arabic letter Del for the letter D? What do you think the meaning of these 8 balls are? Because a lot of people think that they are spaces. I even thought about this. This was my immediate response, that these are spaces. That it was meant to separate the letters. Now, I was talking to you guys recently about Adam Ivester, who runs the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed, and I did a bonus episode last week about his Zodiac Killer suspect, John Parr Cox. And Adam has a lot of strong opinions about the Z13 cipher, and one of them is that he believes that the cipher has to go in order. Like, it has to be a substitution cipher, a simple substitution cipher. And maybe I didn't say in the suspect profile video as to why he thinks that. And it comes from a quotation from the NSA talking about how if it were not a simple substitution cipher that goes in sequential order, then people would never figure it out. Maybe they would get lucky or something like that, but not to everybody's satisfaction, not like the Z408, not like the Z340, because the amount of possibilities would immediately become astronomical. If somebody were actually trying to create a solution that someday, some way, somehow, they wanted people to find, it would go in sequential order. Now, that's Adam's take on the subject. My simple response, which I did share in the video, was that, well, you can put anything you want into your cipher. You, whoever you are listening to this episode right now, if you were to create a 13-character cipher, you can do whatever you want with it. You can add in Arabic letters. You can use the playing cards and the ace through king. You can do that if you choose to. Who is to say that you can't? Who is going to prevent you from making your own type of code the way you choose to do? I just think that that is something that we have to take into account. But I do have a small follow-up, though, about my bonus episode that I did last week, talking about the suspect John Parr Cox. Adam and I used to correspond regularly before we had a falling out, and Adam once approached me with an idea as a way to discuss his suspect on the internet. And no one has ever come to me with an idea like this before, and even though Adam and I, as I said, have parted ways, I still think that this was a good idea. He wanted to make a YouTube presentation called The Trial of John Parr Cox, and he would play the role of the prosecutor, like an attorney. He would pretend to be an attorney, going full-on in-character mode, and then he would just present the case for John Parr Cox being the Zodiac killer. And then there would be a defense attorney who is going to make objections and counter-arguments. And he asked me if I would play the role of the judge, because I do this segment Zodiac Monday that isn't committed to a single suspect. So he thought that that would be a suitable role for me. I would play the role of being the judge. And I was actually even thinking, oh, I need to go out and buy some type of secondhand judge wig and appear on camera, get some secondhand robes. Like, I would have gone full in-character mode as well. And on Wednesdays, I do a segment about Jack the Ripper here on BlackBoxOnlineRadio, and I've been critical of other people in the Ripper world for being too, quote-unquote, theatrical with their presentations, and that presentation that Adam had proposed would be extremely theatrical. But the reason why I thought it was a good idea was it wouldn't just be three people pretending to be attorneys and a judge. There was also a step that Adam wanted. He wanted 6 people to play the role of the jury. In the final 30 minutes of the presentation, no matter how long it was, the final 30 minutes would be reserved for just showing the jury deliberating, talking about it. Okay, well, he has brought forward these parts of evidence, and it was opening up the suspect to scrutinization, to criticism. People would actually be evaluating the evidence right on camera. You could just pull 6 people, close followers of the Zodiac Killer mystery or not, any 6 people, and then they could just talk about the merits of the ideas. And that's why I thought it was a brilliant idea. But, I mean, we explored some other possibilities of sharing his material, and then, as I said, Adam and I chose to part ways because of things that were not related to YouTube. And I've shared mostly everything I have to say about his Zodiac Killer suspect in the bonus episode that came out, Zodiac Killer Suspect John Parr Cox Extended Edition, and I invite you to check that out. You can also hit the like button and subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And you can also go through some of the links in the description box. One of them is for BuyMeACoffee.com. BuyMeACoffee.com/BlackBoxNet88 allows you to make a donation or contribution to help support the show. And anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And the first one comes to us from Batman66. Batman66, thank you so much for your regular and consistent support. Also for helping with the shorts. And the YouTube shorts will return tomorrow, and I'll be putting those out. I'm trying my best Monday through Friday, 4 to 5 days a week if I can. And there are just so many stories that I'm following as a true crime follower. And Batman66 has been sharing a lot of it with me, and they're things that I get curious about, and that's how the shorts get created. So also, please check them out on Facebook and Instagram, Ned DeHaan on Facebook. I have a page for Black Box Online Radio over there as well, and BlackBoxNet88 on Instagram. I release the reels over there as well. There are short episodes released as reels. And the second one comes to us from River Prawn Pottery. And River Prawn Pottery made a comment about the most recent bonus episode about John Park Cox as a Zodiac killer suspect and said that at the end, I gave him a suspect rating, a likelihood suspect rating of 4 out of 10. And he said, wow, that's generous, Ned. Short answer, yes, that's very generous. And the reasons why is just that part of me still thinks that Adam could continue his investigations and his research into John Park Cox, but only as somebody who was writing the letters or had some type of role in the creation and composition of the Zodiac killer's written materials or the composition of the Zodiac's persona, anything to do with the actual crimes. It seems like they were committed by someone else, because the fact of the matter is, John Park Cox does not match the witness descriptions. He's too big, too heavy, too tall, possibly even too old. Although I did say at the beginning, talking about those AI composites, that it does resemble somebody, what I thought in his mid-40s. John Park Cox was 50 at the time of Zodiac activity. The reason why he got a 4 out of 10 was very similar handwriting. I definitely think he would have had the brain for it. And he also he fits into that mold, very similar to the suspect Shel Cavalli, where you would have some guy who is an elite, a social elite, a millionaire elite even, and living the double life. Someone who actually goes on to become a secret double life serial killer. And the reason why Adam incorporates this into his theory is that John Park Cox was somebody who was the man who ran Parr Terminal on the Richmond waterfront, and he would go out to lunch with the mayor, go out to lunch with the chief of police. He was a hunting buddy of Bing Crosby. He's connected to all of these people who are more famous and more powerful than him. And one thing that Adam said in our very first interview, which is no longer available, is that John Park Cox's wife was even mentioned more frequently than he was. Mrs. John Park Cox would even be mentioned in the papers for attending these social engagements. So somebody is just thinking, I want to do something that is more epic than this. Double life, thrill killing, something to that effect. And I can follow all of that. John Park Cox also has a direct connection to one of the crime scenes, the Stein murder. He lived 80 yards away from it. But the problems is just, he was 6'4", 245 pounds. He doesn't extremely resemble the composite sketches. And I just don't see how that somebody like Officer Fowl could look at John Park Cox and think that he was 5'10". And, I mean, I think that if anybody saw him commit the crimes, whether it was Mike Michaud or the Robbins kids, they would just say, yeah, he was huge. He's, 6'4", 245 pounds. I don't think that there would be these types of discrepancies in all of this stuff. And not to mention, other people have gone through Adam's material and they challenge him on all the specifics, and you think that something could be speculation, even though he presents it as fact. We can talk about that another time. I did my episode on the Zodiac Killer Suspect, John Park Cox Extended Edition, and this is going to be a very big week for bonus episodes here on Black Box Online Radio, because I'm going to be doing another bonus episode this weekend talking about the book The Sociopath Next Door here on Black Box Online Radio. Last week I did one on Astro Psych 400, that's another channel that I run on YouTube. And when I was reading the book The Sociopath Next Door, of course I'm curious about the true crime aspects of it. I found that the stuff in the book, it's a psychology book by Dr. Martha Stout, and I found the most interesting parts of the book to be related to just relationships and interpersonal dynamics and dealing with crappy coworkers and friendships, and so to speak. That stuff was really good material, but maybe not the best for a true crime channel like Black Box Online Radio, so I did one book discussion talking about that side of the material on Astro Psych 400, and this weekend I will be doing a bonus episode on the true crime aspects of the Sociopath Next Door. It'll probably be called The Sociopath Next Door Book True Crime Book Discussion, or Book Discussion, the True Crime Side, something like that, but you can always hit the like button and subscribe once again if you want to follow along with these true crime discussions. Every Wednesday I do a segment about Jack the Ripper, and every Friday I do one about D.B. Cooper. And over the weekend, I did a bonus episode as well. As I said, many bonus episodes coming out because there's a lot of true crime news. And I was talking about a breakthrough in the Long Island serial killer mystery. And that is that The suspect, who is in custody now, Rex Heuermann, has now been tied to the 1993 murder of Sandra Castilla, who was originally from Trinidad and Tobago, but she was murdered in New York, and her body was found in 1993. And she doesn't appear to have been mutilated and dismembered the way that the other victims in the 1990s and early 2000s were. But the breakthrough is that Rex Heuermann was tied to the murder of Jessica Taylor as well because of DNA. Hairs were found on the crime scene that had a DNA match. And they had Rex Heuermann's DNA because of a pizza crust that he discarded in New York City. And I mean, Jessica Taylor was very, very viciously mutilated, decapitated. She had a tattoo that was cut up. And it's my understanding with Sandra Castilla that she was cut and her body was definitely attacked and assaulted, but not dismembered in the same way. So then, what they believe, and it's not even just they believe, it's just they've discovered documents from Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer suspect. They found Microsoft documents on his computer that he had deleted, but they could still access, talking about making blueprints for these kills, talking about how he was going to do it, things that he needed to do from the last kill, improvements, hit the victim harder, and also cutting off the hands and the head. He was a step-by-step methodical serial killer. I mean, cold, methodical, and calculating is an understatement. He planned these things out extensively, and it wasn't just spur-of-the-moment rage killings, definitely not an impulsive serial killer. An enormous amount of thought and planning went into this, and on the bonus episode, I referred to him as a serial killer who was experiencing arrogant ignorance. Arrogant ignorance. And this is one where he is just thought that he was going to get away with it, so he just got a little bit sloppy with his track covering, for lack of a better terms. But it's good that he is in prison now. And if you're curious about that mystery, I invite you to check out the bonus episode on the on this channel here, Black Box Online Radio. It's called Long Island Serial Killer: The Murder of Sandra Castilla. And I told you at the beginning of the episode that I was watching the live stream from Drew Beeson on his channel, and there was a video that was recommended to me from The Evaluator, and it says, "Every psycho killer explained in 13 minutes." And I'm going to try and explain their topics in 3 minutes. And we have Plainsfield Butcher, Ted Bundy, Rostov Ripper, Zodiac Killer, Charles Manson, Night Stalker, Killer Clown, Jack the Ripper, and the Milwaukee Cannibal. So I think that looking at these different types of serial killers is a very good psychological examination because it shows how and why people are thinking. Number one, Plainsfield Butcher, that was Ed Gein. He had mother issues. There, nutshell version. Number two is Ted Bundy. Ted Bundy was the lady killer, but I believe he dealt with animosity toward his family, feeling betrayed by them, as well as an intense obsession with pornography. And this led to him acting on very sexual impulses, partnered with psychopathic tendencies, and not feeling anything for the victims. In short, he was a sexually motivated, psychopathic serial killer. Then we have the Rostov Ripper. The Rostov Ripper was Andrei Chikatilo. He's also called the Butcher of Rostov. For him, he openly said it. It was sexual dysfunction. He was very embarrassed and ashamed about sexual dysfunction, and he experienced a greater form of arousal when he was committing the murders, doing a diagonal over to Charles Manson. Charles Manson is somebody who mostly wanted revenge on society. The murders that he's most famous for are ones that he didn't personally commit, but it's possible that he ordered and instructed his followers to commit. But no matter what theory you're using, I believe that Charles Manson wanted revenge on society until I had that conversation with a neuroscientist that turned into an episode called The Neuroscience of Serial Killers here on Black Box Online Radio. And I was just received the information that after Charles Manson died, they examined his brain and determined that his neurotransmitters were practically functioning backwards. He could be a very clear example of a born psychopath who was mistreated by society in his own mind and his worldview, so he wanted revenge. Then we have the Night Stalker. The Night Stalker was Richard Ramirez, and he was somebody who also had lack of bonding with his family, partnered with morbid obsessions, an obsession and exposure to morbidity at a young age, and just showing indifference to his victims. I've also frequently said that I thought that Richard Ramirez was a criminal thug who got out of control. He starts out by burglarizing houses, and then his devious tactics escalate in almost a twisted snowball effect where he is burglarizing, stealing, buying drugs, and then eventually he starts killing the people, but he showed indifference to their well-being. Then we have the Killer Clown. Killer Clown was, of course, John Wayne Gacy, and I think the driving force for him was child abuse partnered with being ashamed of his bisexuality. John Wayne Gacy was openly talking about being a bisexual after he was incarcerated, and he was beaten severely by his father, as well as just experiencing homosexual tendencies and being very ashamed of that, which led to a form of rage, but also experiencing some type of arousal from hurting the people, sexual sadist, psychopathic, torture, murderer, and I just think that comes from the neurological functioning partner with genetic components. Now we have Jack the Ripper here. Jack the Ripper is somebody who is not identified. There are two serial killers on this list who have not been identified, Jack the Ripper and the Zodiac. We don't know who Jack the Ripper truly was, but it appears that he had animosity toward women and he experienced some type of sexual arousal from mutilating women. Not just killing them, but mutilating them. And I'm really not exactly 50-50, it's more like 51-49, where I think that Jack the Ripper had neurosyphilis, and I talk about this on Ripper Wednesday, that he was experiencing almost schizophrenia-like symptoms, but he was not completely a schizophrenic. There's a form of syphilis that affects the brain in that way, and he may have contracted syphilis from a woman, let's just leave it at that, and that he wanted revenge on women because of that animosity. Then we have the Milwaukee cannibal, Jeffrey Dahmer. Now, if we're going to say that Richard Ramirez had a fascination with morbidity at a young age, Jeffrey Dahmer is an even more extreme example of this. He's performing necropsies on dead animals in a shed and doing weird, twisted experiments. But with Jeffrey Dahmer, I believe that he was an intense dopamine-centered personality. He did things that fueled his own excitement. He was very unconventional, and he never broke out of that because other people just always gave him a free pass in life, and then ultimately that turned into him thinking that he could get away with murders. But Jeffrey Dahmer did put some intense efforts into his planning. He said, though, by his own admission, he would have gotten away with it if it hadn't been for his alcohol habit. If he hadn't been such a sloppy drunk, he would have gotten away with the crimes. So I think that there is also some very twisted psychopathic torture murderer associated with Jeffrey Dahmer, but for him, it's mostly about a power obsession. He said he only killed the victims because he didn't want them to leave him. He wanted power over other people, and again, he was somebody who was dealing with his homosexual tendencies, which he wasn't very proud of. And that brings us to the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer is, again, one of the unidentified serial killers on this list, but it is Zodiac Monday. And the Zodiac Killer is somebody who perhaps was actually pretty good at covering his tracks and destroying the evidence. The Zodiac Killer was someone who was very thoughtful, and it appears that he did this perhaps out of rage killings as well as thrill killings, maybe starting out with rage and then going into thrill killings and testing the waters, seeing if this is going to work or not, but at the same time, he's being very thoughtful, very methodical, and definitely very calculating. What I was talking about with Rex Heuermann, the Long Island serial killer, is that he made some efforts to cover his tracks, but the way that he disposed of the victims and dismembered and mutilated the victims created more possibilities for evidence to have been left behind. And as I told you guys already, hairs were found that had DNA evidence left behind, and they made DNA connections. The Zodiac Killer didn't handle the bodies a lot, and if he did, he was wearing gloves at Lake Berryessa. Maybe he handled Paul Stein's body with bare hands in a taxicab, but they did such a poor job of collecting evidence. Even if the Zodiac hadn't been methodical and calculating, he wouldn't have had too many problems with that. But most importantly, the Zodiac was somebody who wanted to commit murders. He wanted to create the persona. He wanted to act out this power-filled fantasy where he is better than everybody else, and he wanted to act like he was some type of supernatural or paranormal being who is going to exist in the afterlife, almost like a god, or maybe even not exactly a god, but some type of king or pharaoh who had slaves that were going to work for him in paradise. And I think that that is all symbolic. I don't think he actually believed that. I just think that he thought he was better than everybody else. So he killed people who had access to sexual partners or romantic partners, or maybe even he just killed people because he thought that he was superior to the rules of society. But that's my take on the subject, and thank you so much to everybody who has listened to this episode. And I would also like to give a shout out to Dennis G, who has shared a lot of the images that you're looking at going by on the screen. Thank you so much to Dennis. And a lot of the pictures that you are seeing have been sent to me from him, and he uses the email address BlackBoxOnlineRadio@AOL.com. Anybody can write the show there. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook is in the description box, and there is always BlackBoxNid88 over on Instagram. And I will see you guys on Ripper Wednesday. Goodbye.